It's not a black and white issue. I love it when people say, this is what we need to do to fix it, because that's not the case. You're not going to fix it just by lowering the Fed rate. That's not going to fix it. But you frequently hear people say, if only they did this, then that. That's not true. It's gray. There's a lot of moving parts.
Welcome to One with the Other Way, a podcast about your journey and finances. I'm your host, James. We have Wanda with us today. We're discussing the hot topic of inflation. Now, just to kind of get started, just for definitional sense, Investopedia defines inflation as the gradual loss of purchasing power that is reflected in the broad rise of prices for goods and services over time. Now, that is just a straight definition, but I think it's a little more nuanced. So, Wanda, let's kind of get into the weeds a little bit, but I don't want to get too deep.
Nuanced is really, I think that's the word of the year, is going to be nuanced, right? Basket of goods. And then there's all kinds of theory, right? It's never black and white. It's all gray, right? So there's three kind of buckets or tranches that we find inflation, right? First is demand. If everyone wants it or needs it, that price is going to go up. We do know that. Phones prices go up as we want them. And then there's the cost push, right? How much it costs to get that thing from there to here. So how much does it cost labor-wise? How much is it going to cost transportation-wise? All these kind of intangibles, not to mention the product itself, what's happening at the point where the product is. And then the other is built-in expectations. It's interesting to me that if we, they say, if we think about inflation, then we see inflation, right? That's that confirmation bias that we frequently talk about. But there's really, inflation will always be present. Things will always cost more today than yesterday. And the thing that we really only have control over is the art of your financial program. So amount, rate of return, and time. We'll come back to that one.
So thank you, Wanda, for talking about these kind of three, I guess, tenets of inflation, kind of where we see it. But if you're being honest, where do we see this when you're talking to a person? If you're just having a conversation with someone and they're worried about inflation, how is it actually impacting them? And why should we care about it?
The only time inflation really matters is, can I buy the thing that I want? Do I have the income that I need to buy the thing that I want? Whether the income is during my working years coming from my employment or during my retirement years coming from my investment accounts. Do I have money to buy the thing?
Who do we see is impacted the most by inflation then?
We all like coffee. In fact, that's one of the things that most of us drink, right? Everyone would argue that the price of coffee has gone up in the years that we've been drinking coffee, right? In the last 20 or so years. Yet the supply of money correlates with the cost of coffee, and the cost of coffee itself hasn't risen relative to the supply of money that's out there in the last 20 years, which is hysterical, I think, because I'm looking and I'm like, I just spent $9.88 for a cup of coffee in Huntington Beach. Well, there you are, right? So what other things affects inflation includes things like the supply. And so when you look at coffee, did you know there was a drought in Brazil?
No, I did not.
For the last 2 years, and that supplies 35%, about a third of the coffee beans to the world. Did you know that Vietnam is also having climate issues?
I didn't. This is all news. This is all news to me.
See, and that affects 20% of coffee beans. So half of the coffee bean supply, the point where we get the coffee bean itself, is being affected by adverse weather conditions. So you have to consider, right, that it's going to add to the cost, or it will be inflationary. The price we see is higher than the price that is out there. The other thing that affects coffee, of course, is the person who's serving it to us. So you have the coffee bean itself, inflationary because these climate things, which, we're busy in our world and missed the drought conditions in Brazil. The other thing is the person who's serving us the coffee. So, and this is a topic of discussion in terms of wages, how much that person is being paid to serve us that coffee. And people may not know this, but Department of Labor says tipped employees only need to be paid $2.13 per hour. So $2 times 2,000. What is that? 4,000 a year? But the average employee at Starbucks is paid $17.50 per hour. So definitely more than the $2.13, about $36,000 a year. And so, but that person's wages have gone up for a myriad of reasons, right? First is it costs more to find someone who's going to come in and work. No one's going to work for $2.13. I'm fairly
Sure.
confident. And then you have the demands of healthcare, providing healthcare for employees, providing benefits for employees, providing retirement plans, which is now a requirement. So again, to the coffee story, right? You have the coffee bean itself, which is suffering, causing prices to go up. And then you also have the labor, that basic labor cost. You're asking if inflation is important, and who's it important to? Gas. How often do we fill up our cars, right?
Everyone has to fill their cars with gas. Unless you have totally electric now, I guess.
Oh, that's a different story. However, gas is an interesting phenomenon. Again, you have the commodity itself, the gas, right? And then you have much more cost associated with gas, which I find fascinating, right? So the cost of gas itself is only about half of that. Like when you look at the tank of gas, $4, $6, half of that goes to the cost of gas. 20% goes to the cost of taking that raw material and making it into something. Think about the engineers that are responsible to make that gas work. All those guys, engineers, highly paid, highly technical in these refineries across the United States. And then bringing us this is another 20%. So if it's coming from wherever it's coming from, Alaska, the Mideast, doesn't matter, coming to us, 20% of the cost associated with that. And then taxes is around 20%. So $6. What is that? 6 times 2 is $1.20. $1.20 in taxes, average, right? And so all of those, each of those single components can be inflationary. Refinery workers want more money. Safety hazards become an issue. Regulatory requirements become an issue. I'm amazed that we get gas for only $6 a gallon in California. How much is it where you are?
Well, we went and got gas. We went to the beach on Saturday for the day, and it was like $2.80.
So about half of my price. So what's the cause of that? Again, just geographical differences, getting gas from me, from where it is to me, and for you getting gas from wherever it is to you.
There's all these different inputs into bringing the goods that we have. We don't really think about all those different things.
No.
Why is it that we see $6 in California versus, $3 somewhere else here? Or you see with your coffee, I remember I was in California with you on a trip and coffee was like $10 versus like my coffee here is like 6 or 7.
Yeah.
Why is it so, regionally different?
Right. So supply and demand, right, on the cost of getting it from here to there, right? And so in this case, the expectation, because then my expectation is it's expensive to live in California. I'm going to ask for more money on income. If I ask for more money, that's that third lever of inflation. If I ask for more money, the business owner feels compelled to charge more in order to ensure that he's making a decent profit. And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it goes round. And this is actually the cost spiral that the Fed is currently concerned about, right? We expect inflation. Consequently, prices go up. Consequently, I'm going to my employer and saying, I need more money. So then it becomes a spiral. So a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So do you think that people are actually affording less these days, even though our wages are going up, but also prices are going up?
Yeah. So people are choosing to buy less because they're worried about inflation. So they worry, right? They worry. And then they're like, well, maybe I shouldn't buy that cup of coffee 3 times a week. I'm only going to buy it once a week. And then that coffee shop says, well, I have to charge more because you're not coming as frequently anymore. So
it's a lot of moving parts behind that.
To that point about it's not a black and white issue. I love it when people say, this is what we need to do to fix it, because that's not the case. You're not going to fix it just by lowering the Fed rate. That's not going to fix it. But you frequently hear people say, if only they did this, then that. That's not true. It's gray. There's a lot of moving parts, which I think that we did not talk about the Fed, but that overnight lending rate, the cost of borrowing money, right? I'm going to tie it back to gas. Nobody drills for oil because they have a lot of money in the bank. Generally, they'll borrow money in order to drill for the oil with the expectation that I can sell the oil to become gasoline. That's the same thing in the home for you and me.
Yeah.
We don't own the home. We borrow the money in order to buy the home.
Mm-hmm.
And
Until you pay it off. Yes.
till you pay it off. But in general, most of us will hold on to mortgages. Again, that whole concept of it's less expensive to use somebody else's money than your money. And we get a tax break. We can talk about that when we talk about home
Yeah.
purchases. But what's interesting to me about a home, right? Again, you have the good itself, the house, right? And do I have enough houses there? But nobody's building a house because they have money in the bank necessarily. Like the construction companies aren't building new houses in different areas. They're borrowing money to develop land to buy houses. So the cost of money to them is higher now than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were seeing very low borrowing rates. That's that Fed overnight lending rate. If it doesn't cost a lot of money, then it's easier to borrow money. Oddly, the current mortgage rate right now is a 6.7%. And the average since 1970 is 7.7%. How high do you think the cost of borrowing money for a house has gone in the last 20 years, 30 years?
I'm trying to think about how the 2008 crisis probably affected this.
The cost of the good itself, right, went very low. Borrowing money is not the same as the cost of the good itself. House borrowing costs peaked around 18 or 19% in the 70s and the 80s.
Why was that?
The cost of money. Those were the days of what we call stagflation. We had very little growth. And in order to borrow money, it was very expensive in those times. But I know when I was growing up, it was close to 17, 18, 19% to borrow money. So the current rate is more normalized. But this is that recency bias that we consider when we consider behavioral economics or whatever.
Yes.
But we think about it. I know that we used to be able to borrow money for 2 or 3%. I know people who have borrowed money for 2 or 3%. Yet over a lifetime of, we're going to live 70 or 80 years, that rate has fluctuated. And in my lifetime, it's been as high as 19%, currently right at around 6 or 7%, which is actually the average since 1970.
I think recency bias is probably in more things than that too. I mean, just think about this. How often do I remember when I was a kid when we would go to the gas station and gas was probably like $1.70 as a kid, and then or $1.50, and my parents probably remember it being even lower than that. And then I remember being able, oh well, I want to go get some candy from the gas station, and it was $1. But now I walk into any gas station now, and you see all the prices, and it's like $5-6 for a thing of gummy bears or something. And
but there's a couple other things going in the gummy bears, right? There's the amount of gummy bears in the packaging, so the packaging's gotten bigger. So it's funny that you mentioned that, because even like we've talked about coffee, we've talked about gas, right? Does inflation affect us? And then we've talked about the home. These things affect us. And the Happy Meal, we used to go when I was a young child. Back in the day when we walked uphill 10 miles of snow. But it used to be, we would go as a family of 7, we would go when the Happy Meal cost less than $1.
Have you noticed where prices have been rising, but actually the amount in the packages are less? Because that's actually happening more, I feel like, in fast food.
Yeah, that's another
for
thing,
instance.
packaging, right? Yet companies go 2 routes with that. We can talk about packaging in another podcast. They can either charge the same price for less material or give you like a little bit super slurpy, big whatever.
Yep.
Big size thing.
Yeah, mega size.
So they can, and then charge you more for that per thing. So really, I think the important thing in inflation is it's very gray. It's not a black and white. There's those technical definitions, yet it has to do with the experiences you and I have. And each of us have our own experience in our own life, no matter what your income level is. The important thing is that you're able to afford the thing that you want, that you can purchase the thing that you want. And so for our families, what's important is to figure out the art of your financial plan. So the amount that you put away, the rate of return, and the time, these are the things that are going to affect your financial plan. That financial plan will be designed to allow you to purchase the thing no matter what the inflation is, no matter what the gray is.
Thank you so much for listening to One Went the Other Way. If you want to schedule an appointment with Wanda, you can find us at financesforreallife.com. The schedule appointment button is on the top right of the screen. And you can follow us on this podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. Thank you for listening. We post every 2 weeks. We'll talk to you in the next episode. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, SIPC. Investment advice offered through Finances for Real Life, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from LPL Financial. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision.